Welcome back to Health Hacks. I'm Tara Peterson.
And I'm Dr. Jeni. Today we're diving into autoimmune conditions, but we're looking at this from a root cause functional medicine perspective.
Yes, because most people are all told your immune system is attacking your body, but they're not told why that's happening.
And even more importantly, they're not told that in many cases there are underlying drivers that we can actually address.
Exactly. Today we're going to connect the dots between the immune system, the gut, hormones, and lifestyle factors and help you understand what's really going on.
So, Tara, when you're sitting with a patient, how do you explain what is happening in their body when they have an autoimmune condition?
Well, I like to simplify it, but also I like to give a visual aid. Your immune system is constantly scanning for threats, things like bacteria, viruses, toxins. But with the autoimmunity, we see a lot of immune tolerance.
Yeah, so that's the key phrase, immune tolerance.
Yes, because the body should tolerate its own tissues, but instead immune cells like T cells and B cells start identifying self-tissue as a foreign invader.
And once that process starts, you produce something called autoantibodies, which begin attacking specific tissues. And some common examples are thyroid cells, which that would be Hashimoto's thyroiditis, or joint tissue in the case of rheumatoid arthritis.
And this is where chronic inflammation comes in. Cytokines, these inflammatory signals, they stay elevated.
Right. And instead of a short-term immune response, you have a long-term dysregulated response.
And that's why people feel like their body is constantly on edge or inflamed. And one thing we see often is that symptoms show up years before a diagnosis is given.
Yes, and that's because the immune system dysfunction starts long before actual tissue is damaged severely enough to receive some kind of diagnosis.
Right. So the early symptoms might include things like fatigue, brain fog, digestive issues.
And when you're looking at this from a physiology standpoint, a lot of that comes back to mitochondrial dysfunction, that's dysfunction in the cells, and inflammation.
Yes. So we had a podcast last week on mitochondrial dysfunction.
Yeah.
If you missed that, you can go back to that. But yes, when inflammation is high, the body diverts energy towards immune activity instead of normal cellular function.
And then we also start to see blood sugar dysregulation, which makes inflammation worse. It's this vicious cycle, really.
Exactly. Elevated glucose leads to glycination and oxidative stress, which worsens immune balance.
So what looks like just fatigue or I'm just tired is actually can be a much deeper metabolic or immune issue.
Exactly. So let's talk about a big statistic. About 80% of people with autoimmune conditions are women.
Ooh, and so that's where things start to get really interesting from a scientific perspective.
Yes, we actually wrote a blog and a podcast on this because we see this pattern frequently in our clinic.
Yeah, so let's break it down and why. Why is this hitting women in an unproportional way?
Well, first off, estrogen and immune modulation. Estrogen actually enhances immune activity, and it increases antibody production and immune cell activation.
So that's really handy if you're fighting an infection, but it can also increase your risk of immune overactivation.
Exactly. Then we look at hormone fluctuations. So in men, you just, at puberty, get your hormones, keep your hormones until you pretty much, get old. But on women, we have fluctuations monthly. We have peaks at puberty, pregnancy, postpartum, menopause. We see major immune shifts.
Yes. So that's when autoimmune conditions usually show up or are triggered in women. We see that a lot.
Yeah.
They don't realize they had an autoimmune thyroid condition until they had a baby. And then all of a sudden they feel like they're postpartum depression. And really it's a thyroid autoimmune problem that showed up because of these hormone fluctuations triggered this cascade.
Absolutely. Another factor is the X chromosome activity. So women have 2 X chromosomes, unlike men, and many immune-related genes are located on that X chromosome.
So actually, there's a higher likelihood of immune dysregulation genetically in women also.
Right. And then we layer in chronic stress.
Oh boy. So now we're affecting the HPA axis. And if you haven't heard that term, it's hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And it alters cortisol patterns, which cortisol is your stress hormone.
Mm-hmm. And cortisol is supposed to regulate inflammation, but when it's dysregulated, inflammation can run unchecked.
Yeah. So now you're combining hormones, genetics, stress. It just creates this perfect storm.
Yes, it really does.
Yeah. But that's also the most empowering part, because a lot of these things, if you can put your finger on them and walk through them, you can actually start to address them.
Yes. And research shows that 75% of autoimmune conditions are driven by environmental factors. So let's walk through them. We often see increased issues, digestion issues, leaky gut, or intestinal permeability. So that the term for that, the scientific term for that, it just means your gut layer, the lining of it is breaking down and allowing food or pathogens to enter into your bloodstream. And so this can also be because inflammation is high, your body diverts energy towards immune activity instead of normal cellular function.
Yeah. So now you have those tight junctions. They're supposed to be really tight so food doesn't leak out of your gut into your bloodstream. But now, because of that, the gut lining is compromised and things start leaking into the bloodstream. Mm-hmm. And that can trigger an immune response, because things are entering the bloodstream that shouldn't enter them if your gut is intact properly. Because the body is going to see these particles as foreign invaders, and that's where you get immune activation. And what's that fancy term for that? Tell us that fancy term. Molecular mimicry?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And go ahead.
Yeah. So you have a food. It's like gluten or protein or something like that. And it reminds your body of another tissue. So one of the examples of this is there is a protein in wheat products that's called gliadin that looks a lot like the thyroid tissue. Mm-hmm. So that's why one of the best things you can do if you have an autoimmune thyroid condition is cut out gluten containing and wheat containing products, because this molecular mimicry, it sees that and it starts attacking that, and then it looks a lot like the thyroid. So you start cross-reacting that with the body. So that leads right into the second issue with that we're talking about here, which is gluten sensitivity.
Yeah, so gluten can increase xylem, which regulates gut permeability. And then if you have this intolerance to wheat, and then you eat it, and then your body recognizes it as an invader, and then it causes further damage on your thyroid or whatever, or your joints, whatever your body's attacking.
Yeah, and just a little side note on this, this zonulin that increases when you have intestinal permeability or leaky gut. One of the things that I was seeing in the research is that they're starting to be able to test for that. There are tests you can do for it. And the medical answer for this is they're just going to start testing everybody for zonulin. And if you have elevated zonulin, they're going to give you a drug to bring down the zonulin.
Oh, my goodness.
Like, talk about treating symptoms without understanding. Like, the problem is you have Swiss cheese holes in the gut. And it just so happens to produce a chemical when that happens. So we'll just get rid of that chemical, but we'll leave the big Swiss cheese holes there. I don't know. Like, it's just so dumb. You can't even make this stuff up. What's the third one? What's one of the next one, Tara?
So heavy metals, mold, pesticides, they all increase oxidative stress.
And then that starts to burden our detox pathways, and especially the liver.
And this leads to immune activation and inflammation.
Yes. So then we talk about chronic infection, right? Things like Epstein-Barr virus. There's a whole bunch of different viruses. That's just probably the most common example that are linked. They have a strong link to autoimmune conditions.
Yes, and they can keep the immune system in a constant state of activation, which is not good.
Yeah.
All right. Also, chronic stress shifts the immune system towards a pro-inflammatory state.
Yeah, and then long-term cortisol dysregulation reduces immune regulation, because if you think about it, cortisol is a stress hormone, and if you're stressed out, your body has other things to do, like keep you alive, so it's not modulating your immune system the way it could. So you depress your immune system for a season when you have high cortisol.
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about some practical ways to help autoimmune conditions. So let's talk about how we can actually start calming down the system.
Oh, I love this one. So food is one of the fastest ways we can impact inflammation.
Yes, and anti-inflammatory foods help reduce cytokine activity and oxidative stress.
And they support a healthy gut microbiome, which plays a huge role in immune regulation.
And about 70% of the immune system is from the gut.
Yeah, that's crazy, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So when we improve our gut health and diversity, we start to improve our immune system health and balance.
And we do have some favorites. We love fermented food. Jenny has a favorite fermented food.
Oh, kombucha. I love kombucha. I drink it every day.
She does. And this fermented food increases beneficial bacteria. And then we also love omega-3s. You can get this in salmon or sardines if you happen to like that. But we also have a supplement that we love. It's called Orthomega. And the Orthomega is a high concentration of fish oil. And it is of a very good quality. It's third-party tested. It has the EPA and the DHA from the fish that you need to get that good quality fish oil. So, and we also love antioxidants and polyphenols. So you'll find that in things like berries and vegetables. And this helps support your gut and your microbiome, and then also your immune system. But you can also get this in a supplementation form.
Yeah, and so those are the things you want to add. What are some things you want to subtract from a diet
you want to do both.
to eat in anti-inflammatory way? You want to cut out as much sugar as you can, because that is sugar spikes your insulin. So what you want to do is reduce your insulin spike and therefore decrease inflammation. Processed foods, because there's a lot of toxic crap in processed foods. A lot of times, if you read the label, if you can't pronounce these words and they sound like they were made in a lab or a factory instead of grown on a tree or, swimming in the ocean or something like that, you probably don't want to eat it. And then gluten is another thing, especially if you're dealing with autoimmunity, because of the reasons we talked about with the molecular mimicry and
And it's just inflammatory for a lot of people, even if you don't have an autoimmune response or your
so
gut
many
permeability.
people.
Yeah,
You're just really better off if you can figure out a way to have a diet that doesn't include much, if any, gluten. You're just going to feel better. Most people are going to feel better.
All right. If someone is overwhelmed, where do they start?
Okay, let's start real simple. Start with keeping your blood sugar level. If you need to wear a continuous glucose monitor, that's a great tool. We use those all the time, and they're super helpful. Remove inflammatory foods and support good gut health. Those are 3 simple pillars that you can do.
Absolutely. And a lot of people underestimate the power of prioritizing sleep and having a good, healthy sleep routine. It is critical for your immune system and regulation, and then also managing stress. It seems too simple, but even 10 minutes a day of leaning into some self-care or a quiet time or any kind of repetitive motions like walking, prayer, meditation, yoga, those are all can be really powerful.
Yeah, and you don't have to be perfect. Consistency is going to trump perfection all day, every day.
Autoimmune conditions are not random, and they're not just bad luck.
They're actually the result of underlying imbalances that once we uncover, we can start addressing.
And that's what we do every day, helping patients connect the dots.
So if this resonated with you, we'd love to hear your story. Leave us a comment or send us an email or connect with us and tell us, hey, this really resonated with me. Or share this podcast with somebody and share it with your story, because stories are really how
powerful.
you connect with people. Yeah.
And if you're ready to take the next step, we do offer a free consultation to help you identify your root causes.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Health Hacks.
And we'll see you next time.